The Dispossessed is a science fiction novel from 1974 written by Ursula K. Le Guin. It follows the story of a scientist from the moon planet Anares who visits Uras, the planet his home orbits, in order to carry out his research using the advanced technology and resources available there. The society that exists on Anares is nominally anarchic and was created 2 centuries prior to the main events of the novel by an anarchist splinter group that left Uras with the hopes of creating a different, better society to the capitalist one, of the sort we in the West are familiar with that they have left behind. The book provides the reader with a profoundly clear-eyed imagination of the anarchist society that exists on Anares. Le Guin doesn't write in vague terms about a perfect system where scarcity and struggle are abstractions for its inhabitants to muse on. Rather, a critical or ambiguous utopia is depicted, termed succinctly a heterotopia, exploring the issues that would conceivably plague a society of the kind that the people of Anares strive to maintain. Things like censorship, damaging ideological pressures, and the unplanned emergence of structural hierarchies are all worked into the vision of this society's operation, alongside the ways that individuals combat and secede to them in their real lives. This critical and realistic dimension to Le Guin's perspective is part of what gives the importance to her contributions to science fiction as a genre, as well as to the work of imagining a different future in general. I'm going to talk about Richard Witt's 2024 article Schemata of Estrangement in Ursula K. Le Guin's The Dispossessed. Witt uses the theories of estrangement and schema to assess Le Guin's construction of an anarchist heterotopia, and I will start by explaining what those theories are. So, Viktor Shklovsky, who was a 20th century Russian formalist, is the figure primarily responsible for the development of the idea of the literary technique of estranging the reader. It's posited that estrangement or defamiliarization is fundamental to the success of any artwork. By making something unfamiliar to the reader, special attention is drawn to it. This allows the reader to re-envision what is usually encountered in their empirical life as ordinary and mundane, as if for the first time, and thus understand it in a significantly novel way. With science fiction in particular, texts naturally involve the technique of estrangement, because inclusion in the genre necessitates the formal device of an imagined alternative world to that which is occupied by the author. And with utopian science fiction like The Dispossessed, estrangement functions in service of socio-political re-evaluation, according to Darko Suvin, the author of Metamorphoses of Science Fiction, whereby the things which are defamiliarized are man's social relations, such that the relations which prevail in reality can be assessed critically in comparison. Suvin submits that science fiction involves the implementation of what is termed a novum, something novel that is inherently estranging and narratively circumscribes the analogous relation of the alternative world to the real world. The introduction of the notion of the novum differentiates Suvin's analysis from Shklovsky's because Shklovsky's conceptualization of estrangement only involves the rhetorical technique of positioning things which really exist in a novel way, rather than utilizing entirely unfamiliar textual content that refers to things which don't really exist, like with a novum. Regardless of this distinction, Witt clarifies in his article that both analyses are relevant in understanding the socio-political structures envisioned by Le Guin for her critical utopia, her heterotopia. So, schema theory. Schema theory posits the existence of schemata. These are psychological tools that we use to facilitate our storage of information about the world and process new information as we encounter it. The restaurant schema, wherein we know to expect to be sat at a table upon entering, to look at a menu, to give our order, to receive our food, to pay and to leave, etc., is a useful example of a schema that you or I are likely to construct. Schemata can be learned and modified over time via accretion, which is the addition of new information to an existing schemata, tuning, where new information forces us to modify existing schemata, and restructuring, which is where new information forces us to either totally revamp existing schemata or create an entirely new one. In 1994's Discourse and Literature, a theorist named Cook provided a model for applying schema theory to literary analysis. He notes that literary discourse can be schema reinforcing, as with accretion, schema preserving, as with tuning, or schema disrupting, as with restructuring. Within schema disruption, schemata can either be destroyed, reconstructed, or new links between previously unconnected schemata can be established. Schema disruption also operates at 3 different levels: the level of knowledge about the world, knowledge about text layouts and structures, and knowledge about language structures and usage. In addition to these, Culpeper introduces the idea of social schemata, which include expectations on the reader's part about individuals, groups, social roles, etc. So how does all of this apply to the dispossessed? How can the concrete possibilities of life in Le Guin's anarchic society be highlighted and understood using the principles of schema and estrangement? In the book, the anarchists on Henares speak in an invented language called Pravich, and it is understood that the structure of the language was intended to be anarchic in nature, so that the reinforcement of hierarchical thought through language might be avoided. As a literary mechanism, the fictional language serves to estrange, causing schema disruption for the reader at the levels of world and language schemata, by orienting the reader in the linguistic space that would be occupied by an anarchist. The Pravich word which Witt highlights as most salient is klegich, translating to drudgery. This refers to the expectation that everyone periodically engages in basic menial work that is required for society to continue functioning. If everyone adheres to the notion of klegich, nobody is required to carry out this work permanently. This is disruptive to the work schema of the readers, as it forces them to reimagine how work can look, that people might ordinarily work as fits their interest while also contributing to the maintenance of society. There is far more autonomy in this vision of work than in the one we experience in reality. We can understand klegich then as contributing both to schema destruction on the reader's part, but also to schema construction regarding the reader's work schema. Where we are forced by the implementation of the Pravich language alone to question the preferability of our work system and consider a new model. Other schema-disrupting Pravich words in the book include mama and tada. These parallel our words for mother and father. However, a child on Henares might refer to any adult who fulfills some sort of parental role as mama or tada, and may not even necessarily refer to their biological parents as such. Additionally to these is the word amar, which parallels our words for brother and sister, but which is used to refer to any inhabitant of Henares. The usages of these words reflect the communal, non-hierarchical familial structures on Henares, where children tend to be primarily raised in communal nurseries rather than at home, and where everyone is considered a sibling and anyone can be considered a parent. In this way, these terms disrupt the familial schema likely to be held by the reader, causing us to reconstruct them by re-evaluating the primacy of biological family over non-biological family. Other times in the book, we encounter anglicised neologisms of Pravich words. We see an example of one of these neologisms when the protagonist, Shevek, is rebuked by another character for egoizing, rather than sharing, after vigorously defending his position regarding an area of physics. The concept of egoizing fits into the egalitarian communication schema on Henares, whereby non-mutually beneficial communication is made taboo in the very structure of the language, something that is recognisable to the reader to a degree, but which is certainly schema disruptive in its extremity, as is the broader egalitarian communication schema it represents. Another neologism which is found in the book is the phrase body profiteer, which Shevek uses to describe a woman he encounters while he is on Uras, Uras being the kind of analogous world to Western capitalism. The word for profiteer is held as the most contemptuous word in the Pravich vocabulary, understandably, as capitalist economics are fundamentally contradictory to everything an anarchist believes in, and profit is clearly fundamental to capitalist economics. The woman that Shevek encounters on Uras flaunts her sexuality in a way that the protagonist is unable to compute, leading him to sexually assaulting her. We can understand this by applying the aforementioned concept of social or attitude schemata, where different groups have different attitude schema surrounding a certain shared concept. The people on Henares and Uras have the same profit schema. Both people understand it to involve an individual's material inflow outweighing their outflow, but their attitude schema regarding profit is different. When the protagonist encounters this female body profiteer on Uras, where her behaviour is accepted and understood, he himself becomes estranged. The differences in attitude schema can't be computed, and he acts in a way that is unacceptable to him or to the people on Uras, but crucially to the reader as well. But it is not only the concept of profit and its related world and attitude schemas which is relevant here. On Henares, The schema of possession or ownership are devalued, and they have no word in the Pravich language. This connects to the sexual schema, because there is resultantly no term which reflects the act of a man having a woman, or vice versa. And this is something which is equally schema disruptive for the reader as it is for the people on Uras. When Shevek encounters the body profiteering woman on Uras, we might understand that, due to the discrepancies between the sexual schema on Uras and Anares, he is unable to understand that her flaunting of her sexuality has nothing to do with any real desire on her part. The fact that he becomes estranged on Uras, then, is further disruptive to the reader's schema because it comes as a result of the fundamentally disruptive possession schema held by the people on Anares. Le Guin uses the novum of the Pravich language to orient the reader into the anarchist perspective. We are repeatedly exposed to elements of anarchist life via the language, such that its unfamiliarity becomes somewhat familiar to us by the time Shevek travels to Uras. In this way, we are able to experience the estrangement he feels upon encountering their society, despite the fact that it is so much more similar to our own. These parts of the text, where Shevek is estranged from the schema of his environment, employ a more Shklovskian version of estrangement, where the mechanism by which the reader is exposed to unfamiliarity is not the novum of the Pravich language, but the textual re-envisioning of the ordinary as strange. We have just seen a little of this coming into play in the case relating to sexual schema, although the estrangement involved there is primarily due to the employment of the linguistic novum. As this new method of estrangement is textual, though, it requires that we look at an excerpt from the text to discuss it. And Witt highlights the following. This is a quote. The bed, the massive bed on 4 legs, with a mattress far softer than that of the bunk on the Mindful is the ship that Shevek travels in, and complex bedclothes, some silky and some warm and thick, and a lot of pillows like cumulus clouds, had a room all to itself. The floor was covered with springy carpeting. There was a chest of drawers of beautifully carved and polished wood, and a closet big enough to hold the clothing of a 10-man dormitory. Then there was the great common room with the fireplace, which he had seen last night, and a third room, which contained a bathtub, a washstand, and an elaborate shit stool. This room was evidently for his sole use, as it opened off the bedroom and contained only one of each kind of fixture, though each was of a sensuous luxury that far surpassed mere eroticism and partook, in Shevek's view, of a kind of ultimate apotheosis of the excremental. He spent nearly an hour in this third room, employing all the fixtures in turn and getting very clean in the process. So, in this excerpt, the reader pays witness as Shevek himself is forced to massively restructure his schema of homes and the furnishings and functionalities they contain. We see him encounter material excess for the first time, and he is led to produce an entirely new schemata of luxury, something which was entirely conceptually alien to him beforehand. The estrangement we see Shevek experience here simultaneously affects the reader by driving us to further restructure our own schemas about things. This works because, based on the inferences we can make from his reaction to the luxuries he is encountering, we can gain further insight into what his life is like, and thus retune our schema of anarchism. And, to accommodate for this, we become again forced to reconstruct the schemas of our own lives. So, to conclude, Witt demonstrates how Le Guin uses the concepts of linguistic and textual estrangement and schemata within our constructions of an anarchist heterotopia and the lives of the individuals who populate it. And this functions to encourage the reader to seriously re-envision the knowledge they have about their world and look towards how things might legitimately work if they were different. Thanks.